The wind was a blade against Luke Callahan's face, honed sharp by 100 miles of snow-drowned prairie. It howled a lonely tune around the collar of his sheepskin coat, a song of ice and starvation he knew by heart. Every winter in the Wyoming territories sang the same tune. Luke bowed his head, letting the brim of his hat take the worst of it, his eyes fixed on the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves. Jasper, his gelding, was a stout beast, but even his breath came in ragged crystal plumes that shattered in the air. The cattle were bedded down in a sheltered draw where the cottonwoods grew thick, fed, and as safe as anything could be in this merciless land. Now there was only the cabin ahead, a small box of warmth he had built with his own hands, waiting for him at the edge of the world. He rode out of the timberline and saw it at last, a dark shape against the endless white, a thin thread of smoke rising from the chimney like a prayer. He'd left the fire banked low that morning, just embers that would be waiting to be coaxed back to life. The thought of it was the only comfort he'd had all day. But as he drew closer, something was wrong. The snow around the woodshed wasn't smooth anymore. A dark patch broke the perfect blanket, a shape that didn't belong. He squinted through the swirling snow, hand drifting to the rifle in its scabbard. It might have been a shadow, or maybe a deer that had wandered too close and fallen. Out here, death came easy and often. He nudged Jasper forward, boots creaking in the stirrups. The wind screamed louder, but the shape didn't move. It was just a heap, half buried in the drifts. He dismounted, his boots sinking deep into the powder. Cold seeped instantly through the leather. He moved closer, the silence broken only by the crunch of snow beneath him. When he reached it, the shape took form, a person. Face down. Small, a bundle of rags left to die in the snow. Luke knelt, knees cracking, and gently turned the body over. It was a woman. Her face was waxy white, framed by dark hair matted with ice. Her lips were cracked and blue. One cheek was swollen and bruised, the marks spreading up to her temple like spilled ink. Her clothes were little more than torn cotton, useless against the cold. For a heartbeat, Luke thought she was already gone. But then, there. A faint puff of vapor from her lips. A breath. He didn't stop to think. He scooped her up, one arm under her back, the other beneath her knees. She was weightless, all bone and frost. Her cold sank through his coat into his skin, biting deep. He carried her through the snow toward the cabin, each step heavy and desperate. Inside, the air was still and chill, but it was shelter. He kicked the door shut behind him and laid her on the bearskin rug before the hearth. She looked even smaller there, fragile as a broken bird. Her hands were stiff claws, her fingers red and raw. Luke moved quickly. He threw more wood onto the embers, blowing until orange flames licked up and filled the hearth with light. The warmth spread slowly, chasing back the dark. He knelt beside her again. Her clothes were frozen to her body. With careful hands he cut away her boots and dress, the fabric tearing like paper. Beneath the thin chemise, bruises bloomed dark along her ribs and arms, finger marks, cruel and deliberate. He didn't let himself feel pity. Pity could wait. She needed warmth first. He wrapped her tight in wool blankets, tucking them close around her shoulders and feet. He filled the kettle with water, hung it over the fire, and rubbed her hands between his own, rough, calloused palms moving rhythmically, trying to coax life back into them. Her skin was stone cold. Her breath was shallow, barely there. He worked in silence, jaw clenched, eyes focused. He had pulled calves from snowbanks before, watched the spark fade, and then return with slow, stubborn breaths. Humans were no different. Life just needed time and warmth. When the water warmed, he soaked a cloth and wiped the grime and blood from her face, careful around the bruise. His touch was steady, gentle, almost reverent. He found a small cut hidden in her hairline and cleaned it too. She didn't stir. He brewed a weak broth and lifted her head to try and give her a sip. At first, nothing. Then her lips parted and a faint sound, half a cough, half a gasp, escaped her. A few drops went down, and she swallowed. That small, fragile act hit him harder than any bullet ever could. She wanted to live. Luke sat back, the firelight painting his scarred face in gold and shadow. He studied her face, her bruises, the stubborn rise and fall of her chest. She couldn't be more than 20. Whoever had left her to die had done worse before that. He'd seen men like that. He'd been one of them once, when violence had been easier than mercy. He added another log to the fire and took his chair beside her. The wind shrieked outside, shaking the shutters. Inside, only the fire and her uneven breathing filled the room. He kept his rifle within reach and his eyes on her, waiting, guarding. Hours passed. Night swallowed the world. She began to shiver violently beneath the blankets, small whimpers slipping from her lips, sounds of terror more than pain. Her body fought against ghosts that wouldn't let her rest. Luke watched, silent, his jaw tight. He knew that kind of fear, the kind that lived in your bones and never left. He closed his eyes, but the crackle of the fire twisted into another sound in his mind, the thunder of gunfire. The smell of pine became the stench of gunpowder and blood. A child's scream echoed somewhere deep in his memory, cutting through time like a knife. He forced his eyes open, dragging himself back to the present. The woman on the floor. The fire. The storm outside. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. He wouldn't let the ghosts win tonight. Not his, and not hers. He sat there until dawn began to pale the frosted window. The woman was still alive. Her breathing steadier now, her face less ghostly in the firelight. He didn't know her name, or her story, or what devil had chased her to his doorstep. But he knew one thing for certain. Whatever had broken her, it hadn't finished the job. And as long as she was under his roof, he wouldn't let it. The storm didn't let up for 3 days. Snow fell thick and steady, burying the cabin in silence. Inside, the fire burned around the clock, the only light against the endless gray. Luke barely left her side except to tend the horses and bring in wood. The woman, still nameless then, drifted in and out of consciousness. When she did wake, her eyes darted around the cabin, wild and terrified. She would flinch if Luke moved too fast or spoke too loud, as though expecting a blow. He spoke gently, kept his distance, and let the fire do the talking. She ate in tiny bites when he wasn't looking. He'd set a bowl near her and turn away, pretending to busy himself with chores, and later find it empty. Every day the color crept a little back into her face. Every night the shaking came back worse than before. On the third morning, she sat up for the first time. The blankets were pulled up to her chin, her dark hair falling around her face in tangled curls. Luke was sitting in his chair, mending a piece of tack, pretending not to notice her watching him. Her lips parted, and a small voice broke the quiet. "Eva?" He looked up. "What?" Quote. "My name," she whispered. "Eva." Luke nodded once. "Luke," he said simply. It was the first exchange of words between them, but it felt like something important. A bridge across the silence. She was no longer just a ghost on his floor. She was a person again. That night, when the wind outside began to howl like a living thing, Eva started to shake again. It began with a tremor in her hands, then her whole body. The fire roared, but she couldn't stop. Her teeth chattered, her breaths came fast and shallow. Her eyes stared into the flames, but Luke could tell she wasn't seeing them. She was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cruel. "Eva," he said quietly, but she didn't hear him. Her trembling grew worse until it looked like her very soul was trying to escape her body. She made small, broken sounds, whimpers that twisted something deep inside him. He'd seen fear before, seen men die with it in their eyes, but this was different. This was the kind that lingered long after the danger was gone. Luke stood, his chair scraping softly on the floorboards. He hesitated for only a moment, then knelt beside her. "Eva," he said again, low and steady, "it's all right." She didn't respond. The tremors grew violent. She gasped as though choking on air. Luke made a choice then, the kind that came from instinct, not thought. He sat down on the rug beside her, the heat from the hearth warming his back. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. He slid one arm behind her shoulders, the other beneath the blanket, and drew her gently against his chest. She stiffened instantly. A choked sound left her throat, half fear, half protest. Her fists pushed weakly against him. "It's all right," he murmured. "You're safe." His voice was low and even, the same tone he used to calm a spooked horse. He didn't release her. He just held her, steady as stone, letting her fight if she needed to. The fire popped softly beside them. Little by little, her struggle eased. The fight drained out of her until she was trembling against him, small and broken, her forehead pressed to his collarbone. Then the sobs came, deep, wrenching cries that shook her whole body. Luke said nothing. He just held her tighter. It was a long time before the tears stopped. When they did, she stayed where she was, limp and spent, her breathing slowing to match his. He could feel the faint rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. For the first time since he'd found her in the snow, she was warm. Truly warm. He stayed that way until her shivering stopped completely, her body heavy with exhaustion. Then her head tilted slightly, and he realized she was asleep. Peaceful, finally. Luke sat still, staring into the fire, his jaw tight. He wasn't thinking of himself or the loneliness that had filled this cabin for years. He was thinking of the bruises on her arms, the cut on her forehead, the way she had screamed in her sleep. Whoever had done that to her was still out there somewhere, and if that man ever came for her again, Luke Callahan would be waiting. When morning came, Eve awoke in his arms. For a long moment she didn't move. The warmth, the steady rise and fall of his chest, it was unlike anything she'd felt in years. Then realization struck. She pulled away suddenly, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself, eyes wide and uncertain. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, voice trembling. Luke stood and gave her space. "You've got nothing to be sorry for." He poured 2 cups of coffee, his movements quiet and practical. She took hers in both hands, staring into the steam. Her lips trembled as though fighting words she wasn't ready to say. He didn't press her. Later that day, while he mended a saddle strap, she spoke again. Her voice was soft but steady. "My father owed him money," she began. "A man named Elias Apprentice. He said the debt could be cleared if I married him." Luke's hands froze, the leather strap slipping from his fingers. "I was 17, she continued, eyes fixed on the fire. "My father thought it would save us. He didn't ask what I wanted. I became that man's wife, and from the first night, I stopped being a person." The story came in pieces, her voice quiet, shaking but determined. She told him about the bruises, the fear, the nights she'd tried to run, about the beating that nearly killed her, and the storm she fled into with nothing but a torn dress and the will to die free. When she fell silent, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Luke didn't look at her right away. He stared into the flames, jaw set, eyes hard. "His name's Apprentice, you said?" Quote. She nodded slowly. "You don't have to worry about him anymore," Luke said, his voice flat and calm. "You're safe here." He looked up, and in that look there was something cold and unshakable, something that promised the man who hurt her would never hurt anyone again. For the first time, Eva believed it. She believed she might finally be safe. That night, the storm outside broke. But inside, a different kind of storm was settling, one made of anger, justice, and a growing bond neither of them dared to name. The storm had passed, but peace didn't come with it. The days that followed were cold and tense. The sun shone on the snow like broken glass, but the air inside the cabin stayed heavy. Luke kept himself busy cutting wood, fixing tools, and checking the traps. Eva stayed close to the fire, still thin and pale, her eyes always darting toward the window as if afraid the wind might bring someone back with it. Then, one evening as Luke returned from the ridge, he noticed something strange. Tracks. 2 sets of hoofprints cutting through the snow, stopping near the timberline. They hadn't come all the way down to the cabin, but they'd been watching. He brushed the snow off his coat before stepping inside. Eva was stirring a pot of broth. She looked up, her face instantly tense. "What is it?" Quote. "Riders," he said simply. "Up on the ridge." They didn't come close, but they saw the smoke. Fear flickered in her dark eyes, but she didn't speak. Luke went to the window, the firelight carving deep shadows across his face. "If it's who I think it is, we don't have long." That night, neither of them slept. Luke sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle, while Eva watched the flames, her hands twisting in her lap. Finally, she whispered, "He'll come for me, won't he?" Quote, "Luke didn't lie. Men like him always come back. But if he does, he'll have to go through me." There was a quiet finality in his voice. She looked at him then, really looked, and something inside her shifted. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was the only thing standing between her and the darkness she had run from. The next day he rode into town for supplies. He promised he'd be back by nightfall. When he left, the cabin felt empty, too big for her small frame and too quiet for her thoughts. Every gust of wind sounded like a knock at the door. When Luke entered the general store in Redemption, the chatter stopped. He could feel the weight of eyes on him. Word had spread. Elias Apprentice's wife had vanished, and a bounty had been offered for her return. "Callahan," the storekeeper said, his tone cautious. "You've been keeping to yourself these days. Heard you've got company up in those hills." Luke's expression didn't change. "Just me and the winter," he said, voice flat. He paid for his supplies and turned to leave when he noticed two men at the saloon across the street. Lean, hard-faced, watching him too closely. Hired guns. Apprentice's men. He didn't ride home fast. He didn't need to. They'd follow soon enough. When he reached the cabin at dusk, Eva was by the fire mending one of his shirts. She smiled when she saw him, a small, hesitant curve of her lips that warmed him more than the flames ever could. But that warmth didn't last long. The following morning, a rider appeared through the trees. Luke saw him first, a lone figure in a worn hat, his horse lathered with sweat. "Get inside," Luke said quietly. "Bar the door." She obeyed. The rider dismounted slowly and lifted a hand. "Luke," he called, "it's Clay." Luke's grip on the rifle eased slightly. He knew Clay from cattle drives years back. A decent man. Inside, Eva watched from the window, her breath fogging the glass. She saw the two men talking, their faces grave. Then Luke waved her out. Clay nodded toward her. "You've got trouble coming. Apprentice knows where she is. He's got Judge Hartley backing him. There's a bounty on your head now too, Luke. $200 for harboring her." Eva's face went pale. "Because of me," she whispered. Luke didn't look at her. His voice stayed low and calm. "Then it's my fight too." Clay's jaw tightened. "You can still run. Head north into the high passes. You might lose them there." Luke shook his head. "I'm done running." After Clay left, the cabin was filled with silence again. Eva stood by the fire, her arms wrapped around herself. "They'll kill you," she said. "You know that, don't you?" He met her eyes. "Maybe. But not before I end this." That night, she couldn't stop crying. He held her until the sobs turned to silence. When dawn came, he was already saddling his horse. "You're going to Clay's wife," he said firmly. "She'll hide you till this is over." "I won't leave you," she said. He stepped close, resting a hand against her cheek. "You will, because if you're here, I'll be fighting with one hand on my gun and the other on my fear for you." She pressed her forehead against his chest. "Promise me you'll come back." "I'll try," he said, and that was the truest thing he'd ever spoken. Luke rode out before sunrise. Eva watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned back into the small cabin that had become her only home. He rode to town that same day. The street was empty except for 4 horses tied outside the saloon and the faint sound of piano keys echoing inside. Luke dismounted, tied Jasper, and pushed through the doors. Elias Apprentice was there, sitting fat and smug at a table beside Judge Hartley, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Luke walked straight toward them. "You and me," he said evenly. This ends today." Apprentice laughed, but his eyes were hard. "You really think you can walk into my town and tell me when things end?" Luke tossed a crumpled piece of paper onto the table. It was a statement from a young servant girl, the proof of Apprentice's cruelty. The judge glanced at it, smirked, and let it fall to the floor. "You don't understand, Callahan," Hartley said softly. "We are the law here." "Not anymore," Luke said. The first shot came from one of Apprentice's men. Luke's revolver answered faster. The saloon erupted into chaos. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the hired guns were down. Apprentice was on the floor, clutching his chest, his blood soaking the boards. Judge Hartley fled through the back door, his power gone with the echo of gunfire. Luke staggered, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Clay and a few townsmen burst through the doors, guns drawn. "It's over," Clay shouted. Luke dropped his weapon. The world tilted. Then everything went black. He woke 3 days later in Clay's spare room. The wound hurt like hell, but Eva was there. Her hand was on his, her eyes full of tears and relief. "You came back," she whispered. "Guess I'm too stubborn to die," he rasped, managing a weak smile. Weeks passed. Redemption was changing. The judge had vanished, and men were talking about electing a real sheriff. The town that once bowed to fear was finding its spine again. When spring came, Eva received word from a traveling lawyer. Her so-called marriage to Apprentice had never been legal. She was free, truly free. The day she got that paper, she stood on Clay's porch staring at the horizon. For the first time in her life, she could go anywhere. She could start over. But freedom meant nothing without him. That evening, Luke found her gone. Panic rose in his chest until Clay told him she rode north toward the cabin. Luke didn't waste a second. He rode hard through the melting snow, his shoulder aching, fear and hope wrestling inside him. When he reached the clearing, he saw smoke curling from the chimney. She was there, kneeling by the hearth, coaxing a fire to life. She turned as he stepped through the door, her face lighting up with a smile. "I was worried the flue might be clogged," she said softly. He stood there, unable to speak. She walked to him, eyes shining. "This time," she said, her voice steady, "I'm staying for the spring, and the winters too." Luke swallowed hard. The last of his ghosts seemed to fade in that moment. He took her into his arms. That night, snow began to fall again outside, soft and slow. The fire roared bright inside the cabin. Eva trembled once more, but it wasn't from fear or cold. When he pulled her into his lap by the fire, she smiled through her tears and whispered, "This time, I'm shaking because I'm alive." And for Luke Callahan, that was all that ever mattered.